What does this kanji here mean?
So this kanji here means person. And you can see it sort of looks a bit like a person. I mean, it's kind of like maybe a person with no arms or head, right? So it's like maybe someone with a really wide stance. You could also maybe think of it as it's like a wishbone, right? So maybe a person wishbone, right? So there's a few different ways you can kind of remember this one. And you can see I've given you a few example words here, just going to show you how it's used in context. When we use this kanji on its own, it's just hito, which just means person. But you can also see it combined with other kanji to form these words here. And you'll see it's read slightly differently. It'll be either read as jin or nin. And this is to do with the types of readings we have for kanji. It's never just one, usually. Usually we have a couple. And you can memorize it by memorizing the onyomi and kunyomi, as we call it, separately. But how I prefer to do it and how I feel like is personally, I believe is the best method is to learn kanji readings through learning vocabulary. So what that means is just learning vocabulary and then naturally acquiring the kanji readings over time. So pretty much the more vocabulary you learn, the easier it is for you to predict what future vocabulary using the same kanji mean, right? And I feel like that's far superior to learning all the readings in isolation, especially for a certain kanji like life, for example, which just have like hundreds of readings, right? So not really practical for learning all the readings for kanji individually. It just gives you more study time unnecessarily, in my opinion. Anyway, that side tangent aside, if we have a look at some of these words here, first of all, we have jinsei, which is person combined with life to make life, right? And then we also have ninki, which is the kanji for energy on the right there. So it's almost like a kind of energetic person, maybe you could think of it, right? Or you could think of it as like a person is like the energy of the room, so they're popular. So that could be a few ways of trying to remember that one there. Then we also have ningen, which just means a human being. And that kanji on the right there is just the kanji for kind of gap or space, right? So there's a few similar kanji as well. First of all, we have this one for enter, and it looks very similar to person. But if you draw these kanji traditionally, person usually looks like this, right? And enter will look like this. So you notice the main difference is the size of each stroke. So for person, the left stroke is the longer one of the two, whereas for enter, the right stroke is. So that's essentially the difference between those two. But when you're reading them as font on a computer, you'll notice that enter always has that kind of like bigger stroke on top, and it kind of has a little extra, I don't know what you'd call it, an extra line on the top there, just to kind of help you identify it. And then we also have big, which is using person as something we call a radical, right? So a component of this kanji, right? But the difference is, of course, it has that extra line there, and that makes big. So I like to think of it as like a person stretching their arms out and taking a big amount of space. Then we have this kanji here, which is child. And this just, of course, refers to like either a child person, or it can also refer to a child animal as well. For example, if we combine this with like the kanji for cat, we get koneko, which means child cat or kitten.
What does this kanji here mean?
This is the kanji for one. So you'll see that this is a very simple kanji. It's literally just one line. So I like to almost think of it as like a number one, which has been turned 90 degrees like this, right? So that's why I like to remember that one there. And I've got a couple of example words for you here. First of all, we have hitori, which is where we combine it with that last kanji we're learning, person, and that creates one person, right? You can also say hitori de, and then you can add a sentence after that to say doing something alone, right? So it can also mean alone as well. Usually, when this kanji is read on its own, it's read as ichi, which just means one in Japanese. So you'll see that for some of these words here. For example, we have ichiban, which means number one. And that kanji on the right there just means number. But when we say number one, that can actually refer to like number one as in the best, which is quite similar to English. And then we also have ichinichi here, which just means one day. Now, this kanji combination here is one and day, and it can also be read as tsuitachi. And when it's said or read as tsuitachi, it's referring to first day of the month. So slightly different meaning there. But yeah, that's a little nuance between different ways to pronounce this word here. So here's a few similar kanji. First of all, we have two, which is very simply just one written twice. And then three is the same pattern. After three, we get into kind of more complex shapes. For example, for four, we have this shape here. And then 5, we have this shape here. And then 6, we have this shape here. So you can see that the kanji change a little bit after number 3. And also number 10 is essentially like two ones crossed over. It's just like a cross shape. So yeah, those are a few similar looking kanji to look out. Excuse me, to look out for there. But essentially 1, 2, and 3 are all following the same pattern, which is pretty cool.
What does this kanji here mean?
So this is day or sun. So if you take a look at the shape of this kanji, I like to think of it as almost like two drawers, right? I feel like it looks like drawers. So I almost like to imagine it as like a sun in the sky is like drawers, right? And that's a bit of a silly idea. Maybe you could even imagine when you open the drawers like loads of fire or something like that inside. So it's literally like a burning sun. And if we have a look at some example words here, first of all, we have Nihon, which is Japan. That kanji on the right there means book, but it can also kind of mean foundation as well. And then we also have Nichiyobi. Now, this means Sunday, which is like the day of the sun. So this yobi is used at the end of all the days of the week. And whenever you see this yobi, just know it's referring to a certain day of the week. For example, we have mokuyobi, which is Thursday, or we have kinyobi, which is Friday. We have doyobi, which is Saturday. Then we have getsuyobi, which is Monday, and so on. So those are a few days there to kind of help you familiarize yourself with that yobi. And you can also notice that for this Nichiyobi, we're using two different readings for the day kanji here. You can see we're using Nichi at the start, and then we're using this B at the end. And then we also have Mainichi, which means every day. So we're using this Nichi reading again, and this kanji in front there, it looks very similar to the kanji for C, but it's, if you remember, C kind of looks like this, if you're familiar. There we go. But you can notice it's just this part on the right here. And that part on the right there just means every. There's a few similar looking kanji to look out for. First of all, we have this I kanji here. And you'll notice the main difference between that one and day is there's an extra line, right? So instead of just this, we actually have 3 lines instead. And that makes the kanji for I. Then for white here, you can see that one looks very similar as well. But it has this one extra dot on top there. So just look out for that there. And then we also have this kind of sei kanji or radical here, which is just got that kind of like gap around the kind of 2 lines here, right? So that's just one to look out for there, but that one's not really too common, I'd say. It's kind of more like a radical component. And there we are. This has gone ahead and practiced 3 brand new kanji. And if you enjoyed today's lesson and want to learn more, then you might be interested in checking out my 90-day 1000 kanji challenge, where we learn 1000 of the most common kanji in just 90 days. And we do this using memory techniques and pre-made revision resources to help you learn each of these kanji permanently. We also cover other important aspects of learning Japanese, such as grammar, vocabulary, and building more fluency in the language. So if you're curious and want to check that out, it's just the top link in my bio. But apart from that, guys, if you do have any questions about today's lesson, then please feel free to write them down in the comment section below. But apart from that, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day or night, and I'll catch you in the next lesson. Take care.